Do we trust head coach Nick Sirianni in 2024? If the Philadelphia Eagles start to struggle, will they collapse again or learn from 2023? All that and more coming your way on this Monday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Come on in, Eagles fans, to a Monday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. I'm Louie DiBiase, joined as always by my co-host Gino Camilleri. You can find our work also over at Bleacher Report on today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Got some Nick Sirianni talk. If the Eagles get into a tough stretch in 2024 like 2023, will they be able to get out of it better, kind of like they did in 2021? Plus, getting into some second year versus rookie talk and a new game that we're going to play during the dead zone of the offseason. So we'll get into that. We thank you so much for looking into Locked On Eagles, making us your first listen each and every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 back in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 back with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. And, you know, I had this thought about Sirianni because last week on Friday, we had Chris Franklin on the podcast, the NJ.com Eagles beat reporter, and Vic Fangio met with the media last week, as did Kellen Moore. And me and him were talking about like the power that the coordinators will have this year. And even more so than the past couple years when Sirianni became more of a delegating CEO head coach. Like this year, it feels like even more, he's kind of taking a back seat to the play calling duties, the game planning duties. It almost feels like Vic Fangio is the head coach of the defense. Kellen Moore is the head coach of the offense. And it's like, what specifically, we know that of course, play calling and game planning aren't the only things about a head coach, but what is he doing specifically? Mm-hmm. And I thought one thing he needs to really focus on, considering those responsibilities are delegated even more, is the culture thing, is the mental makeup of this team, like making sure, because there will be tough stretches this year. Not every season goes as smooth as 2017 or 2022. That happens every 5 years or so where you're just that dominant, or at least for the Eagles. He needs to make sure that if maybe it's not a consistent like 3 or 4 game losing streak, but let's say injuries start to pile up again, or there's a lot of close games, one of your units is struggling or your coaching is struggling. He needs to make sure this team doesn't get PTSD where the minute there is some adversity, they just completely fall apart again. Like that's what he really needs to focus on this summer, is reestablishing that 2021 almost day by day culture, that mental toughness.
When you revisit that end of the year letdown,
yeah,
there are so many things that if you're looking at what Nick Sirianni was responsible for, you can kind of dissect it in a variety of different ways, because if you're looking at it from a micromanaging / delegation point of view, if he didn't trust his coordinators, which right now they're no longer his coordinators, he brought in 2 new individuals, and he took on more of a responsibility in terms of doing some things that were once delegated, now back on his plate. Maybe it got lost in the shuffle, the idea of him being the guy that calms the waters when things get a little bit crazy. Now, hopefully with Kellen Moore and Vic Fangio, you have trust in 2 guys that they're more seasoned at the coordinator roles. You're going to allow them to do a lot more. And if you get into the situation where you were last year, where you're taking more of that onto your plate, well, we really have to figure out if Nick Sirianni's the guy. But to figure out if he is the guy, which he has been, the best trait that we applaud him for is his ability to connect with the players, to find ways when things are going completely wrong, i.e. that 2-5 season under his rookie tenure, where he was the play caller. He hands off the play calling to Shane Steichen, and then things blossomed from there. Last year, the seas got rocky. It turned into a lot of finger pointing. Nick Sirianni never really seemed to have the answers, and he was covering up for players at times. But at the end of the day, the players still have his back. The organization has his back. The guys that he brought in are going to provide him with an outside set of eyes, which the last 2 guys didn't. I mean, you were hoping that you got that in your defensive coordinators. Didn't happen. Brian Johnson, he didn't really push the envelope. Now, Nick Sirianni has to be the guy that says, okay, you guys do your job and I'm going to get back to what I do best.
Yeah, because if not, why
delegating is. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. What is his best trait, which we always love Doug for as well, and Andy Reid. That's one thing Jeffrey Lurie loves outside of Chip, the guy's ability and head coach's ability to see these players as more than just players.
Exactly. And they were master game planners, Gino. And that's the thing. Nick Sirianni is not going to be doing that this year. So he needs to be especially good at resetting this culture. And like you said, you can't have the finger pointing, the anonymous source, just lack of an answer. And that's what I thought about, because last year was such a massive collapse. It is going to be in these guys' heads. Like, hopefully when that happens, they're not, here we go again, and they just implode. Hopefully that Sirianni can find a way to make sure they learn from that in a positive way and find answers to not have that happen again, because that wasn't just some little stretch of struggling. Like, that was one of the, again, we've said on the show before, maybe the biggest collapse for a contender in regular season history. So that's such an important thing, especially now that his responsibilities in other ways have been reduced. So the good thing is, again, we have proof that this core can get out of those holes. As you mentioned, when they were 2-5 in 2021, they won 7 of their final 9 games, and they ended up making the playoffs that year. Last year, the first 11 games of the season, they were 10-1, playing a lot of great teams with a lot of injuries. Coaching wasn't great. The defense wasn't great. They did overcome a lot of adversity even last year for the majority of the season, but they really checked out when things got tough. And it was, you can point to a lot of reasons why it happened, but most of it, Gino, was mental, because from a roster perspective, a schematics perspective, nothing really changed from 10-1 to 1-6. So it was mental. Nick really, like, that's the main focus for him, at least this summer.
And you're probably saying, oh, that's great. He should be a hype man and be the guy that the coach connects with. But at the same time, a coach has to coach. So how does he hold himself accountable? Because that's how these players are going to look at him. Nick, if we're going to listen to your word and be at your back and be the guys that are your warriors going to battle for you, you have to hold yourself accountable just like the rest of us. I think Nick Sirianni has to do a better job in situational football situations this year, Lou, where Kellen Moore can be the play caller, right? But if it comes down to, if we have to go forward on 4th down, if we have to make a big play call in a 2-minute situation.
Yeah, because he took a huge step back in that way last year, for sure.
He has to be the guy that in those situations, it isn't, oh, it was his responsibility. No, that falls on me. I'm the guy. I'm the head coach, and that's what those head coaches do. The Harbaughs of the world, right? The guys that were special teams coordinators, they're not a defensive guy. They're not really calling plays. But what do they have to excel in? They have to excel in those little areas that are going to be the accountability element for them, right? Because if you're not the play caller, like you have said, you can't just point to him and say, oh, the plays haven't executed, the game plan doesn't work. Right. What do you really do in this regard? He's not a defensive guy like Matt Patricia and Sean Desai, who were scapegoated last year. His thing is, situationally, he has to be the best. He has to be the best leader for this team in terms of getting them ready to go each and every week. There were plenty of times last year that if you look at the tape, that team was not ready to go, especially in that back half of the season. And you have to get back to that way of winning 20 consecutive regular season games, which he has done. And this talking point of Nick Sirianni stepping up to the plate, this is what happens when you get into this high level of coaching, this upper echelon. And an easy example is the Premier League. In the top 7 spots, you're competing for a chance to play in the UEFA Champions League and the Europa League and Europa Conference League. If you don't hit that level, you're just another team. But when you're in that level, the margins are so fine to get to that next step. And
again, it's not going to be smooth. It's never going to be easy. Like, I mean, sometimes it will be. There are seasons where you just dominate and win that many games in a row. But, Gino, like, you look at the Eagles in 2018, 19, 2021, were those disappointing teams in a way, for sure. But they learned how to fight through adversity. In the end, when they were in holes, they found their way out. And again, because seasons are not going to be cakewalks the vast majority of the time. And Sirianni is even more important in this way, Gino, this year, because you lost Jason Kelce. you lost Fletcher.
Yeah,
Cox.
there you go.
It's a younger team. Like, yes, you hope new leaders like Jordan Mailata step up, and Jalen Hurts, of course, and, you know, Jordan Davis, Landon Dickerson, the list goes on and on, our two receivers. But Nick Sirianni is going to be even more needed in that regard because some of your staple leaders are gone.
And if things do get rocky at any point,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the people that are asking the questions inside the practice facility each and every week are going to say, Nick, what is going wrong? And he has to take responsibility, because the second he doesn't, and the second any sort of finger pointing happens, Lou, guess what happens again? We fall right back into that trap where you're one of the worst teams in football because nobody's playing together. The culture that has gotten you so far in some of those seasons that you're talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, heck, look at 2017. You go through a stretch where you play beautiful football and then you just play piss poor.
And you lose
month.
every important position, like left tackle. You lose your quarterback. You lose your middle linebacker.
But you found a way. But you found a way. And the
Yeah.
great teams have to find a way. And Nick Sirianni, yeah, you got to the Super Bowl, man. But when push came to shove, did you beat Andy Reid to get to that great step? That's where you have to be. And that's where Jeffrey Lurie, one of those owners that is going to fire you if you don't hit that upper echelon each and every year. There's plenty of examples of it in Doug Peterson and Andy Reid.
Yeah.
Nick Sirianni, they were talking to Bill Belichick. His seat is never going to be safe, in my opinion. And it's always never going anywhere. So it's always going to fall on the head coach.
And it's all mental if this team doesn't get it done, because they're extremely talented. So if it doesn't happen in 2024, it's because they got that PTSD and they couldn't overcome that mental hurdle of, oh my gosh, like that collapse was just so impactful on us that we don't know how to deal with that. But again, there's proof that this core has been able to get out of those situations in the past. So hoping that if those tough stretches come this year, they are ready and they've learned their lesson for sure. Coming up next, right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, I mentioned the youth of this roster. I want to get into something that our guys over from the Locked On NFL Draft podcast discussed, and it has to do with rookies pushing second-year players. I think there's a lot of that going on in Philadelphia this summer, so we'll get into it coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions do apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Guys, you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? You got to turn down the volume with all the shouting. Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all that screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you campus analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So I love listening to Locked On podcast. Like, we have so many great shows, the local NFL shows, but our national ones as well. The Locked On NFL Draft podcast, Damian Parson, Keith Sanchez, they kill it. And they had a really great conversation last week that I want to get into with you, Gino. They were talking about rookies that are going to push second-year players across the league. And a lot of teams added rookies that will push high draft picks from just a year ago. And they mentioned specifically the Philadelphia Eagles, and we've talked a lot about the cornerback position, but Eli Ricks and Kelee Ringo, like, I don't want to say they were put on notice, but, you know, because of the presence now of Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, not saying the window's closed for those two to have a long-term role on this defense, but Quinyon Mitchell is the future CB1, as long as he is not a bust. Like, that is his spot. I think Cooper DeJean is going to be that long-term, like, inside corner, or however you want to define it, as the slot guy, just the rover. Like, that's a niche role that they're going to use Cooper DeJean in my opinion. So the door isn't slammed shut on Ringo and Ricks to, you know, sketch out to create a long-term role in this defense. But there's no scenario now, I think, where both can be that guy or Isaiah Rodgers. So they need, one of them is going to have a huge summer in order to get playing time, not short term, but long term.
Competition is truly going to get the best out of this cornerback room. And if these young guys can't beat out an older guy like James Bradberry, did they even deserve the playing time to begin with? In my opinion, no. But you give all the reps to Quinyon Mitchell, and the reports are that they want to start Cooper DeJean on the outside and see what he can handle from there. So yeah, if you're Eli Ricks and you're Kelee Ringo and you're any of these young cornerbacks, I mean, heck, Zach McPherson, who hasn't really played any meaningful football for this team in over a year, those guys are going to have to come in a preseason where you only have 3 games. They have to get the starters in a half of football in one of those games. How many quarters do you really have to impress when it comes to on-field football? How they get on the roster? Guys like Eli Ricks, guys like Kelee Ringo, you got to play special teams, because do you keep Josh Jobe just because he can go and play special teams? Because I don't think the playing time situation is between Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, and the 2 guys that we're talking about. That's a rotational role that these guys are fighting for right now. Because Howie Roseman, he put his plan in place, right? He's not going to give up on Kelee Ringo. He traded a future 3rd-round pick to move up and go and get him. But to invest a 1st and a 2nd-round pick in the defensive secondary, Lou,
they're going to get the first shot.
They're going to get all the shots,
they're
man.
Like,
I don't even think it is a talk of those 2 guys being off the field.
No, it's not.
Is the rest of them, Avonte Maddox and Zach McPherson and Isaiah Rodgers. That's who they're competing against.
Yeah, there's no chance that I think Darius Slay loses his job this year. Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean aren't fighting Kelee Ringo and Ricks. Those guys are going to have to fight each other now for... There was 2 spots it looked like available before the draft, but now, again, it's not over for them, because Darius Slay, I don't think, unless he's an all-pro again this year, is back in 2025. I mean, maybe he is, but he would still be under contract. But I think they'll move on if these young guys do develop. There's 1 boundary spot available, and neither one of them, I know Eli Ricks played in the slot last year, but again, Cooper, even if they want to try to play in the slot to create a role for themselves long-term, Cooper DeJean is there. Isaiah Rodgers is a guy that people think he's never played in the slot, but that his traits do translate well into that area. So it's a lot tougher for these 2. But as you mentioned, like, they did trade a future 3rd-round pick for Kelee Ringo. I do think they still hope that him or Rodgers or Ricks, and they all have very legitimate traits that can turn into a CB2 long-term. I do think that role is there, but it's like 1 spot now for 3 or 4 guys. They throw that CB2 in the middle and say, fight for it, because you're not beating out Quinyon. We're not even probably going to give you that opportunity.
And it's not even a discussion at the safety position either, because CGJ's going nowhere, Reed's going nowhere, Sidney Brown's just going nowhere.
Yeah, right.
You can argue that with Cooper DeJean, you could probably get away with keeping those 3 safeties and then going very heavy at that cornerback position to try and lose out on that talent that you have there, because those guys are rosterable players. They're 53-man rosterable players around the NFL if they are to get cut by the Philadelphia Eagles. And I would believe that Howie Roseman would try and get at least something for, I mean, heck, Josh Jobe has some value as a special teamer.
They're going to end up trading at least one of these guys, if not multiple. And that can include Bradberry and Maddox. Like they have so many.
Very much so. And Bradberry is the wild card in all of this, because there's no way, if you keep him, he's just sitting on the bench at that price tag.
No,
he's
the only way
be on the field or on another team. They're
going to wait, I think, to see what these young guys look like in camp. The only way James Bradberry's on the roster this year is if none of the young guys really took a big enough step, and he needs to start in 2024. If James
He's the guy that's on notice, man. Like, he better be training 3 times a day right now to get in shape.
Yeah.
For this
so there's a lot of that going on. Rookies pushing 2nd-year players for the Eagles in the secondary, but it's not just at corner, Gino. Like, you look at also at linebacker. Nakobe Dean's a 3-year player, but basically redshirted his rookie season and kind of last year too. Jeremiah Trotter Jr., like Nakobe Dean, is somebody this Eagles team believes in a lot. Howie Roseman has mentioned him by name multiple times when it comes to like the next leader stepping up. At linebacker, when he's been asked questions about the position, they said they really believe in this guy. But Jeremiah Trotter Jr. is someone that a lot of people had in their top 5 of linebacker prospects. And even though he was a 5th-round pick, I wouldn't sleep on him to potentially be not in Devin White's role, but Nakobe Dean's role. If Dean just kind of quiet again in the summer and in the regular season, and he's injured again, he could lose his job too. Like there's a lot of this going on. You could even say Jalix Hunt with Nolan Smith, or Tyler Keegan against Tyler Steen. There's a lot of it. It's going to be a fun summer, man. The competition is going to be great.
I think the linebacker one comes down to who's going to stay on the field, because that's inevitably who's going to get the minutes. Because if Nakobe Dean can't stay healthy, if I'm a defensive coordinator, it's like, if Jeremiah Trotter might not give you the best play on the football field right away, especially as a rookie. Right. But if he can play 17 games for you.
Yeah. Especially when I got a ceiling guy already kind of in Devin White, like
then you're going to be okay. Exactly.
I kind of need just one dude that's not going to mess up, or like you said, be available on the field.
Nolan Smith is a guy that I think he is going to have to push himself. Jalix Hunt might be a little raw in that position.
Yeah, he's behind this year to push him. But long term, he could push Nolan Smith. It's another fastball off the edge with a lot of athleticism to develop.
Brandon Graham is going to be the guy that if he's playing more snaps than Nolan Smith, we have a legitimate problem at that position as well. But these rookies are going to come in and have all the chance in the world to play right away, especially on defense. There is nobody that is truly set in stone in that secondary outside of Chauncey Gardner-Johnson and Darius.
Yeah, the safeties.
And even in the back 7, that is just a complete up in the air situation.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. I can't wait. I told Chris this on Friday. I'm jealous. I wish me and you could be at that camp, because it's going to be really exciting to watch all these young guys go to war. All right, coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, we're going to have some fun. The dead zone of the offseason, not a lot of news, although the Eagles schedule does come out in 2 days, so we'll have some good content there later on in the week. But I have a game to play with Gino, and it's called First Thought. I'm going to bring up some pictures of some older Eagles in the past, and we're going to just discuss our initial takeaways from the guys. The first thing we think of. So we'll get to that coming up next as we roll along on this Monday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast.
As we continue to talk about our beloved Philadelphia Eagles, we got to pause for a second to talk about our other best friend over at FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and the NHL. Right now, Colorado, they're in a big situation tonight. The Avs got to win to go down potentially 3-1 to a team in Dallas. I hate all teams in Dallas, Lou. I'm sick of them. So I'm going with the Avs money line tonight. I went with the Nuggets last night. If you're a new customer, you want to get in on the action, we have a great deal for you right now. With simply winning a $5 bet, you can get up to $150 in bonus bets. So, for example, you bet on the Avs to win money line tonight and they win, you're going to get $150 additional dollars to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, over-unders, bet a parlay or two, whatever you enjoy. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the entire Locked On Podcast Network, and our best friends here at Locked On Eagles.
All right, Eagles fans, we're wrapping up this Monday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast, and it's quiet around the NFL right now with the draft over. The schedule does release on Wednesday, though. The NFL announced today it's going to be Chiefs-Ravens on Thursday night. We know at least for week 1, the Eagles are going to play that Friday in Brazil against the Green Bay Packers, so we know that's going to be the opener. The rest of it we'll find out Wednesday night. Gino and I will have our initial takeaways the minute that schedule does come out. Until then, we're going to have some fun, as we always do around this time of year. We like to take a trip down memory lane. And, of course, DeSean Jackson, LaShawn McCoy, they're on their podcast last week bashing the hell out of Chip Kelly. So I have a game for Gino. I'm going to pull up 2 players throughout the week, every segment 3. And I want, Gino, the first word that comes to your head, and then we'll elaborate a little more. So I'm going to bring up the first guy, and this is a player from only a few years ago that blew up out of nowhere and then faded away just as quickly as he arrived. He was gone. So I want you to give me the first word you think of when you see this player. So here we go, Gino. I'm pulling him up. And for our audio listeners, it is going to be wide receiver Travis Fulgham. Gino, when you think of Travis Fulgham, what's the first word you think of?
NFL's Linsanity. I had to put like a tag on.
So perfect.
It truly was. It was one of those things that
I never thought of it that way, but that's
how
exactly
long was
how you
Linsanity? It was like 36 days or something
It
ridiculous.
was only what, like a 10, it was like a month of basketball, not even. It felt like a 10-game stretch pretty much.
And that's what it was with Travis Fulgham. It was a
So
nice
good.
little autumn season, right as the leaves are falling. You're like, who is Travis Fulgham? Who's wearing this guy's jersey? Because this is not Travis Fulgham that we have seen in Miami and Green Bay and these places he was before.
He was undrafted, right? And they picked him up like at the end of the summer.
Old Dominion, and all of a sudden he just shows out, and he had the size, he had the measurables, the speed was there for a month, the footwork was there for a month, and nobody knew how to defend him, and then the Linsanity run.
That sentence is hilarious. Nobody knew how to defend.
Dude, no, that's really what it came down. It was like the league in receiving effect, right? Like Kaepernick went crazy because nobody knew how to defend that guy at the time. That's kind of what it felt like.
He led the NFL in receiving for 6 straight games, Gino. Like that, he had at least 70 receiving yards over a month straight of football. Every single game you could count on at least 70 from this random guy you had no plans of playing in 2020. I said fever dream which is exactly like Linsanity. I just can't believe it was real. And then, me and you even at one point, I see this picture pop up from that Sunday night disgusting game with Ben DiNucci and Carson Wentz.
How far we've evolved. I know
that
exactly
podcast,
what you're
me and
say.
you said this could be our new Macklin DeShawn. That came out of our mouths.
Yeah.
And it's so great how far we've come that we don't have to deal with that because we actually have 2 of the best receivers in football to watch on the Philadelphia Eagles. But I mean, Travis Fulgham, I remember the game against the Pittsburgh Steelers. He had the most receiving yards in a single game the Eagles have seen in a decade since Jeremy Macklin back in 2014. Like, this guy wasn't just a Deontay Burnett making a play or two in the end of 2019 or, Boston Scott, Greg Ward, even. Like, he destroyed the NFL for a month and a half.
Was it the Pittsburgh game?
It was the Pittsburgh game where he had over 100 and I believe over 150 yards or at least 120. It was crazy.
He found Jordan's secret stuff and he got it, man.
And then he never did anything again. Is there anybody that's been that good and that bad so quick? Alshon Jeffrey started playing over him. Old man Alshon.
I don't know. I would have to investigate that because it's
one of the weirdest runs in NFL history. You're right. It's Linsanity.
I mean, who was Peyton Hillis had that like weird, crazy
that's a good
year
one. That's a good
was on the cover of Madden. And,
sure, yeah.
I mean, Fulgham didn't go for a year. It was literally 6 weeks.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. But that's Travis Fulgham. Did not do much after that 6-game run with the Philadelphia Eagles. This one's a very popular name, of course, that we got accustomed to over 4 years with the Eagles. But I do wonder what your first thought of is when you think of Miles Sanders. I think people go back and forth with Miles Sanders and how they view his time in Philly. Do you want me to give you mine?
Yeah, let me hear yours, and then
mine's underrated. I think because he was a second-round pick and he didn't sign a second contract, people see that as a whiff. He never, outside of 2022, he never had over 1,000 yards. Didn't become the receiving back that we thought he would. However, for like 4 years, outside of 2022, he was your most reliable weapon in a very talentless offense. And of course, he was behind a great offensive line, but he had at least over 800 yards every single season. The guy was a big play threat as a runner, like one of the best home run hitters from like 60-plus run perspective in the league. And he was your first bell cow you've had since Shady. Like, yeah, he's not Saquon Barkley, but I don't know. I don't think he ever maybe got the love that, even like a LeGarrette Blount did or a Jay Ajayi. I like Boobie. I think he's not as good anymore, clearly, in Carolina, but I'm a Sanders guy.
This one is difficult. There's a couple that I'm kind of playing with where
felt about Miles, to be honest.
I got one, and
yeah,
I think mystery is a good one with him.
Okay,
like what could he have been? Because that first year was,
I know, it's a great
so
point.
insane, and I was playing around with the idea of home run hitter or lightning and about like lightning. I don't know, like how do you even describe what he did? Because there's so many big runs with him where it's
he was such a good receiver that rookie year. It's crazy how inefficient and just ineffective he was in that way.
It was mysterious.
3 years after. It's crazy.
How did they not capitalize on somebody who had such a good rookie year as a receiver to the point where we were saying, one of those episodes you go back and talk about, like, how much money are you going to have to pay this guy? Because it's not going to be enough. You're going to have to pay him like Christian McCaffrey type of money if he gets to that level. Instead, he just becomes a one-dimensional type of guy
which was very surprising.
On and off the field because he had injuries at times. I mean, he never really he didn't play a full season past his rookie year, if I'm not mistaken. So. It's a mystery. What could Miles Sanders have been in Philadelphia? I truly wish he kept on that trajectory because it was special, man. I remember that game in Buffalo. We had the perfect all-22 view. You get Jordan Howard on the fullback lead, and he blows up that linebacker, and Miles Sanders,
or even down the stretch,
everybody and their mother down to the end zone, man.
When you lost to Sean Jackson, he was your only source of explosive plays, like run after the catch ability or just yards like after the touch. You know, that was him. Like that was Miles Sanders in 2019. And then, like you said, he became not in a one-dimensional kind of guy, as in like he would just get you 4 yards every carry, but no chunk yardage. He'd get you those in the run game, but he started dealing with drops, and he just
couldn't throw him the football. You could not throw him the football.
They used Kenneth Gainwell in the 2-minute drill, or pretty much anybody else, and that's surprising. So at the same time, though, I'll appreciate him. Like that offense again needed him for years. 2019, he was your best weapon during a division title run. So it's a weird time to be Miles Sanders too right now because the Panthers drafted Jonathan Brooks, and
poor guy.
He might be on the block, Gino. I don't know. Maybe he comes back as RB2. I would take that. The Penn State backfield.
Now that's a Howie Roseman type of situation, my friend, where he potentially is on the bubble. He gets cut. Is he getting paid this year by Carolina? You potentially bring him back for cheap money.
Yeah, the money's an issue. Yeah, I would not take on that contract at all if that would be
no.
Part
you
of
gotta. It's a mystery, though.
Someone suggested the Dallas Cowboys. I hope he doesn't go to Dallas, because they have no running backs outside of like Ezekiel Elliott.
Miles, like the butterfly effect with him, like it.
He was good though. I mean, that's not a bust of a pick. Like
no, not at all.
He was a very solid player for 4 years.
Yeah, you got a round 2 running back out of him in today's NFL. You get a good one contract. You get a couple 1,000-yard overall seasons, and you get a comp pick from him, which they did because Carolina paid him a ridiculous contract.
The most guaranteed money of any running back last offseason for sure. All right, that's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Thanks so much for making us your first listen each and every day. 4 more podcasts for you this week. Schedule comes out Wednesday, so we'll have some up-to-date content to get into across the NFL circle. Until then, Gino and I are going to sign off. As always, thanks so much for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.